Welcome to South America, the land of conquest, culture, and change. My name is William Cooper. I'm the grandson of Frida Cooper, who is an Amica resident that passed away on July 7, 2023. I miss her, but I'm making my monthly presentations at Amica in her honor. Over 25 presentations, we visited the combined continent of Afro-Eurasia. Last month, we visited Oceania. Now, we will cover South, Central, and North America. Beginning with South America. Bon voyage. Before we start, here's a sizable takeaway. The way that South America was colonized is very different from North America. Firstly, the colonizers. In the south, it was Spain and Portugal. In the north, it was Britain and France. In the south, it's majority Spanish and Portuguese speaking. And the north, English and French. The south is more Catholic, and the north has a Protestant Catholic divide. But now let's begin. We have 10 sections to today's presentation. Section 1, Ancient Foundations before 1532. 1. Early civilizations. The dawn of civilizations began in 1000 BCE. Then we have the famous Nazca civilization with their vast desert geoglyphs called the Nazca lines. The Incas. Everything began in the year 1438 AD, when the largest empire in pre-Columbian Americas took place. They were known for their Inca roads that involved 40,000 kilometers of long roads connecting mountains, coasts, and valleys. We have the famous Machu Picchu that was built as a royal retreat for the Inca elite in 1450. Their religion, which involved the worship of the sun god. Peoples and diversity. We have the famous Amazonian tribes that still exist today, and many of them are still isolated and uncontacted, so Western humans love using drones to kind of mess with them and make them feel like the demons are coming. They have famous textiles and art made out of llama and alpaca wool, but especially we have vacuna wool, which is the most expensive textile in the world. Knowledge and beliefs. They had their famous Inca architecture that involves stones cut with precision, using no mortar, and these buildings and temples have survived earthquakes. That's how strong they were. Toward the conquest. They had several engineering feats, including these suspension bridges woven from rope that can still be used to this day after 500 years. Section 2, the Age of Conquest, 1492 to 1570. Voyages and explorers. Everything began with our Christopher Columbus, who was a Genoese sailor out of Italy, backed by Spain to try to find a way to sail west and find India. He thought if the world is a sphere, we can go west and find the Indies, but he did not realize that there are two new continents stopping him. In his first voyage in 1492, he reached the Bahamas, Cuba, and the island of Hispaniola that is shared between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. He claimed all this territory for Spain, and then he returned between 1493 and 1496, and he explored a collection of islands called the Lesser Antilles, as well as Puerto Rico. Then, on his third voyage, this is when he reached South America, but he still believed that he had found India. However, there are tales that say that he eventually realized it was a new continent, while others say that even on his deathbed, he was hell-bent on the fact that he had found India, and he called the people there the Indians, when we know that they were not Hindi, and they were actually the indigenous Americans. Then, on his fourth and final voyage, he explored Central America. However, he endured storms, a mutiny, and shipwrecks, so this was his last exploration. And this was the map of his travels. So we can see that the majority of the time was spent in the Caribbean, some in Central America, and some in the northern part of South America. Then we have the Treaty of Tordesillas, where Pope Alexander VI told Spain, you get half the world, Portugal, you get half the world, everyone gets half the world. He created a demarcation line dividing the world between these two colonial players. And this is what it looked like. Spain getting almost all of North and South America, Portugal getting Africa, Europe, and Asia, and essentially no one else could partake. But obviously, this was impossible to do, so only in the New World were these lines really respected. Then we have Amerigo Vespucci, and you may have heard his name because of the first part, Amerigo. You may have wondered, why do we call North America, or South America, South America? Why is it not called Columbia or Columbus? Well, it's because he was the guy who realized that this was a new continent. And we honor him with the name of Amerigo America. And that's how the name came. Then we have Vasco Núñez de Balboa in 1513, who crossed the Panama jungle to the Pacific Ocean, and was the first one to experience the voyage between the Atlantic part of Central America and the Pacific part. Then we have Ferdinand Magellan in 1519. He led the first voyage to circumnavigate the entire globe, discovering the very humbly named Strait of Magellan in the southern tip of the Americas. And he proved the vastness of the oceans around South America, which was partly unknown at this time. Then we have Orellana's Amazon voyage in 1541, where he was the first European to navigate the entire Amazon River. And he named it Amazon after fierce women warriors in several indigenous legends. Now imagine being the guy to go home to Europe and say you found majestic, massive cities with large temples, golden rooms, and millions of inhabitants. Well, this is what he claimed he saw, but his reports were dismissed as exaggerations by Europeans. Until the present day, when we use LiDAR scanners to scan and uncover what was underneath the jungle canopy. And we realized that there were gigantic cities that could rival European cities at the time. So this is how developed the Amazon was. We have Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, who was a survivor of a shipwreck in North America, and he wandered through the interior to South America, becoming one of the most important explorers. We have Pedro de Valdivia, who was a Spanish conquistador, a conqueror, who did his campaigns in Chile, and he founded the city of Santiago in 1541. Collapse of the Inca. It was not guns or bombs that killed the Inca. It was disease, the smallpox epidemic that reached the Andes in the 1520s before the Spaniards ever came. And this killed millions of their inhabitants, including one of their emperors in 1527. So this made it much easier for Spain to take over the region because a large percent of the population was already killed. And what they did was that they realized that there was a civil war happening between two rival brothers, and they seized the opportunity to take advantage, and take control of the territory. So there was Francisco Pizarro, who marched into the Andes with 168 men, and he was equipped with horses, steel, and firearms, and he met the Inca leaders. He captured one of the rival brothers in the year 1532, and thousands of other Inca warriors were massacred. Then we have what was the greatest ransom delivered in history, where the brother promised rooms filled with gold and silver and other precious resources and metals. And the Spaniards received the payment, but they still killed him, showing their brutality. Then there was the fall of Cusco, a sacred Inca city that was looted and burned and became a Spanish stronghold. We have the Manco-Inca revolt in the year 1536, where an Inca prince tried to besiege Cusco. The Spaniards nearly expelled him. Resistance continued for several decades, and the Incas' political power officially fell in 1572. We have the establishment of Lima in 1535. That to this day is still the capital of Peru. In less than 3 years, the mighty Inca Empire crumbled. Disease and civil war tore down its defenses long before Spanish weapons ever arrived. This conquest shows how even the mightiest empires could fall. For example, we can see the Mongol Empire, where it was divided into factions after Genghis Khan's death, and eventually it was too weak and it fell. Expansion of rule. We have expansion north in the 1530s, south between 35 and 1550, and the important silver discovered at Potosi, at the Cerro Rico mountain, that held the world's largest mining center, as silver was crucial for Spanish economy at the time. We have the encomienda system in the 1500s, where colonists were granted land and free indigenous labor. They said that they would protect the indigenous people, but instead they used their labor involuntarily and often killed them. Then the Catholic Church arrived in the same decade, with missionaries building churches in new cities, spreading Christianity across the continent. Consolidation of rule. We have African slavery that was introduced, brought to Brazil and Spanish colonies. I've shown this image in several presentations, but what I really like is that it shows just how many millions of enslaved Africans went to Brazil compared to the U.S. or the Caribbean. This is how important it was to the colonial economies. New laws were created in 1542, trying to reduce abuses of indigenous labor, but still they were not given human rights. Then by 1570, Spain controlled the vast majority of South America, just except for Brazil. Section 3, Spanish colonization, 1570 to 1700. Building colonial power. Now, there were new cities established. Lima was the capital of Peru. Cusco remained important, and new cities were built with Spanish great plans over Inca ruins. The Catholic Church continued to dominate the region. Then we have the Spanish Inquisition that happened. In Spain, the monarchy started the Inquisition to consolidate power, as the rulers asked the Pope to catch Jews pretending to be Christians, and the vast majority of them were taken to trial and pretended to convert to Catholicism. Then in 1502, Muslims were also asked to leave, and they also claimed that Protestants were faking Christianity as well. But then in Lima in 1570, a tribunal was set up in Peru, and they targeted non-Catholics, and the converts were accused of several different crimes. Economy of empire. So now encomiendas were replaced by hacienda estates that produce food, wool, and crops for markets. We have new global trade networks shipping silver and other exports across the Atlantic back to Spain. There was new English, Dutch, and French pirates raiding Spanish ships. with silver made the continent the engine of global wealth, tying Europe, Africa, and Asia together. Society and culture. There was the growth of the mestizo identity in the 1600s, which is a mix between indigenous South American and Spaniard. This is similar to, in Canada, we have the Métis people, a mix of French and indigenous Canadian. Resistance and conflict. We have indigenous uprisings that happened, administration and society. Now there were audiencias and royal courts, where essentially courts would hear appeals and enforce laws, and the judges were appointed directly by Madrid. So as a summary, silver mines and haciendas dominated the economy, Catholic Church continued to shape daily life, and resistance persisted. Section 4, Portuguese colonization of Brazil, 1500 to 1700. Beginnings of Brazil. Everything began when Pedro Alvares Cabral landed on Brazil's coast in 1500, and he claimed it for Portugal based on the Treaty of Tordesillas. So then we have the Pau-Brazil trade that involved the famous Brazil wood tree that produced red dye that was prized in Europe for fabrics. Now we have the captaincy system, where essentially this new colony was divided into 15 straight-shaped captaincies that were now hereditary and given to nobles, although most of them failed due to poor leadership and indigenous resistance. Sugar and slavery. So we have the rise of sugar plantations as sugarcane thrived in Brazil's tropical climate. The first enslaved Africans came in 1538. We have the plantation society as wealthy planters dominated politics and the economy. And the impact of the sugar boom led to Portugal relying heavily on Brazilian sugar wealth. Expansion into the interior. So now Sao Paulo became a new settlement in the 1600s. Gold was discovered, and this was remote and semi-independent from the Crown authority. Society and resistance. So Rio de Janeiro was founded in 1565 toward a golden age. Now, gold reshaped Brazil as the Minas Gerais mines outproduced Spanish silver, and Brazil overtook Peru in terms of wealth for the crown. Rio became the capital in 1763, and Portuguese Brazil overall brought sugar, slavery, and gold that defined the colony and the economy. Brazil emerged as the most important Portuguese colony, a land where immense wealth and suffering went hand in hand. Section 5, Other European powers. Dutch ambitions. So the Dutch in the East Indies, in India, had the Dutch East India Company. Here they had the Dutch West India Company, created to challenge the Iberian colonies. So they seized Salvador, which was at one point the capital of Brazil, and they took all these territories here in orange that took around 20 years to be retaken by Portugal. And Suriname, a small colony, became Dutch, seized from the English. French efforts. For the French, they founded French Guyana. Now the region of Guyana was divided between the Spanish, the British, the Dutch, and the Portuguese and the French. So this small area was so important for all these big powers. English expansion. So we have Sir Francis Drake, who was an English privateer, and he attacked many Spanish ports. There were new settlements in Guyana. And we have the Falkland or Malvinas Islands. So essentially this involves 4 key players: the French, the Spanish, the British, and the Portuguese. Because first the French founded a port, Britain did the same thing the next year. Spain assumed control, administering it from Buenos Aires. Britain withdrew from 1774, but they still considered it theirs, and Spain left in 1811. And then a province in the Portuguese colony of Brazil began to take over it. We have Section 6, Iberian South America. Reforming empires. So we have new reforms in Brazil to modernize the colony. Iberian wealth and society. A sizable takeaway. So South America was key in terms of resources, with gold, silver, and sugar fueling Iberian empires, and it became tied into the first world economy. But they especially exploited indigenous and African labor as well. Church, knowledge, and culture. The Catholic Church continued to dominate, and to this day, it is still incredibly important, because in Venezuela, it's 72% Catholic, in Peru, 64%, and in Brazil, 46%. So the impacts of Iberia are still seen to this day. Peak and fragility. A second takeaway, which is that in 1790, Spain's empire was at its peak, controlling 9% of the world, and all this territory seen here in red. For example, in North America, they had Mexico, Florida, the 15 states in the famous Louisiana Purchase, as well as California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. They had all of Central America, South America, except for Brazil, Suriname, and Guyana, Asia, the Philippines, and the Caribbean, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and Jamaica. So they were immense at this time. And if they had managed their colonies properly, we would all be speaking Spanish. Wars of collapse. Everything began with the War of Spanish Succession. Who would control Spain's monarchy? It ended up with the Bourbon dynasty securing the throne, and this set the stage for more reforms. We have the Anglo-Spanish War, where Spain and France fought Britain. The revolts of 1810 that were the first step in terms of Brazil's independence. Simon Bolivar's campaigns, how he led Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador to independence. San Martin's campaigns as he crossed the Andes, liberating Chile, Argentina, and Peru. And then we have what was called Gran Colombia, founded in 1819. It only survived for 12 years, but in South America, it was the second most powerful country, having Venezuela, New Granada, Quito, and Panama. So it was all this territory here seen in green. Its capital was in Bogota, and Simon Bolivar led it. But it all failed when several regions seceded, and Panama separated from New Granada. Now finally, Brazil got its independence in the year of 1822, and this happened by their Prince Pedro de declaring independence, and Brazil became an empire. The final battles involved the ending of Spanish rule in Peru, and also independence finally being secured across the entire continent. Iberian legacy after independence. So we have the Brazilian Empire that had slavery until 1888, the last in the Americas. For context, the U.S. ended it in 1865. So this is how important it was to Brazil's economy. Then we have the importance of Iberian South America as post-independence Argentina maintained their claim over the Falklands. The British settlements continued to grow, and whaling, sealing, and coaling stations anchored strategic value to these two small islands. Then we have the War of the Triple Alliance. In any war, population dies, cities are destroyed, disease maybe comes. In this one, where Paraguay fought Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay at the same time, they lost 90% of their male population. That is how honestly idiotic of idea it was to fight three massive countries. And Brazil began to emerge as a much stronger power. We have the War of the Pacific, where Chile fought Peru and Bolivia. Closing picture. So by 1914, Brazil became a republic, and now coffee exports were instrumental to their economy. The Spanish Republic continued being very unstable in terms of politics, and their exports began to integrate them into the world markets. In the South Atlantic, nationalism took root after imperial claims were formalized over the Falklands, South Georgia, and the South Sandwich Islands. And here's an early fun fact. There are islands called the South Sandwich Islands. But these islands actually existed before the two pieces of bread and filling were invented. It was the Earl of Sandwich who wanted to eat meat without getting his hands dirty while playing poker. So he said, why don't I use two pieces of bread? And it's named after him. A sizable takeaway. We have Iberia's long shadow, because although by 1914 Iberian states were gone from South America, languages, faith, and cities showed their endurance. Section 7. South America in the World Wars. World War I. We have our 6 main causes. Now, South America had World War I. Most nations were neutral to protect their exports, because if you trade with both sides, you benefit economically. But then Brazil declared war in 1917 after Germany blew up some of their merchant ships. Argentina remained neutral despite British pressure, because their grain and beef exports fed all sides of Europe. Peru, Uruguay, so they severed ties with Germany in 1917. Interwar period. We have our 6 treaties signed, but in the Treaty of Versailles, Brazil attended it, and pushed for new League of Nations influence, but was heavily disappointed by their limited role in the new world order. The Great Depression came in 1929, and their exports of coffee, beef, and copper that were instrumental to their economies collapsed. Millions lost jobs, and poverty spread. We have several military coups that happened in the 1930s. The Spanish Civil War that influenced Latin America, as there were volunteers that fought for the side against Franco. World War II. So most nations were neutral at first. However, Brazil joined the Allies when Germany did the same exact thing to them, expecting a different response. So they declared war on the Axis. And Brazil became a rising power because they were in a wartime alliance with the US that heavily boosted their global prestige. Argentina remained neutral, and Chile had its copper exports that were critical for the Allied war industry. So eventually, they kind of symbolically declared war on the Axis. And Peru was with the Allies post World War II. Now, many Nazis afterwards went to South America, as hundreds of them escaped via route lines to Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. Now, this one here is a conspiracy theory that I do not endorse, but it is that there have been rumors of Hitler having gone to Argentina. So normally the story is that he took a cyanide pill, died, and was burned. But other people say that he's been seen in Patagonia, Cordoba, and Buenos Aires. But there's no real evidence behind this claim. Brazil stood out as the only Latin nation to fight in Europe, earning post-war influence, and its alliance with the US cemented its role as a regional leader. Export cycles fueled unrest, giving prestige to new military regimes. Section 8, Modern South America. Cold War and dictatorships. So populist politics began in the year 1945. Then the US supported right-wing regimes to try to stop the spread of communism. Military dictatorships happened in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Uruguay. Economic and social shifts. Then there was a massive debt crisis in Latin America. Just looking at this graph, Europe in red, Latin America in blue. This chart shows percent of GDP that debts covered. And you can see how much higher Latin America was, as they had a large spending problem. Then there were neoliberal reforms where privatization and free market economics reshaped economies, but there was still the debate of the importance of the state compared to libertarian markets. Foreign concessions built wells, ports, and pipelines at lightning speed, and oil quickly eclipsed coffee. So then we have Juan Pablo Perez Alfonso, who was the Venezuelan oil minister, who in 1960 co-founded OPEC, that now covers all these countries shown here in blue, and their goal was to coordinate output and defend producer prices. Then, on January 1st, 1976, President Carlos Andrés Perez of Venezuela nationalized the oil. So this consolidated fields, refineries, and exports, and based on OPEC leverage and the 1979 price shock, Venezuela was called Saudi Venezuela. But the problem was that their imports surged, so their currency became overvalued, becoming somewhat like the Dutch tulip problem, where in the 1600s, tulips could be worth thousands or millions of dollars. And this is how very, very high inflation came to Venezuela. Hugo Chavez came in Bolivia in 1999, and he reasserted power over oil. Conflict and transition. So then there was the Falklands War in 1989, in 1982, where Argentina said, we want the Falkland Islands back. So Margaret Thatcher, as the strong Iron Lady, said, we will fight you back. So over the course of 74 days, the Brits retook the Falkland Islands. And there are still ongoing claims of who controls it. The return to democracy happened in the 80s as several dictatorships fell. Contemporary developments. So we have what was called the pink tide with new leftist leaders that emerged. Right-wing resurgence that happened after corruption scandals weakened leftist governments. And of course, the Amazon rainforest crisis that involves heavy deforestation, with cattle ranching driving 80% of it. However, recently with Brazil's new liberal leader, Amazon deforestation has been going down at record speeds. Section 9, South America Today. Snapshot. Rob Armstrong asks, please tell us about the countries in South America in terms of their economy, population, geography, and languages. So here we have our snapshots. Argentina's capital is Buenos Aires. Brazil is not Rio, not Sao Paulo, but Brasilia. Chile is Santiago. Colombia, Bogota. Peru, Lima. And Uruguay, Montevideo. The largest size by far is found in Brazil at 8.5 million kilometers squared. Same thing for population at over 200 million. GDP over 2 trillion, but behind GDP per capita is actually found in Uruguay, one of the most developed countries in South America. South American politics. So, as I said, Brazil has Lula da Silva. Argentina has the chainsaw carrying Javier Milei, who is a libertarian outsider trying to fix their horrible inflation problem. Venezuela has Nicolas Maduro, who succeeded Chavez, and essentially he's a dictator who's trying to forcibly stay in power. Super South Americans. We have Pele, who was a legendary soccer player. Diego Maradona, a football genius. Shakira, a global pop superstar out of Colombia. And finally, Messi, who is better than Ronaldo, found in Argentina. Special sites. We have Christ the Redeemer found in Brazil. The Iguazu Falls between Argentina and Brazil that are some of the largest waterfalls. The Galapagos Islands in Ecuador, famous for their biodiversity, but also for inspiring Darwin's theory of evolution. Amazing animals. We have the jaguar found in the Amazon. It's the largest cat in the Americas. The capybara. The pink Amazon river dolphin. My favorite, the llama found in the Andes, which is similar to the alpaca and the vacuna, but the best. The poison dart frog that is tiny but brilliantly covered, and the giant anaconda that can weigh over 200 kilograms. And finally, the great sloth. Famous foods. We have feijoada out of Brazil. Asado, which I've had in Argentina, which is a traditional barbecue. Ceviche in Peru, which is fresh fish cured in lime, chili, and onion. Section 10, fun facts. We have Rio's Carnival, which is the world's largest street festival. Brazil, that produces a third of the world's coffee. Ecuador, which its capital, Quito, sits near the equator line, and they have the place with the 0 degrees latitude. Jose Mujica, who was at one point Uruguay's president, and he donated 9% of his yearly salary and was known as the world's humblest leader, living with his dog and his small old car. If you don't know by now, South America is obsessed with soccer and the World Cup. Chocolate may have come from South America, so automatically I love the continent. And of course, the many languages. We have Spanish, Portuguese, but also the hundreds of indigenous languages that are still spoken. So what are 5 ways to say butterfly? Spanish, mariposa. Portuguese, borboleta. Quechua, canchay. Guarani, parambi. And finally, Aymara, chuchinya. Thank you, Rob, and thank you everyone for attending. Any questions? Okay. I explained everything then.
Good, thank you.
Yes, sorry.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
That's amazing.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Look, lights.